Welcome to another romance audiobook, written by Forever Always. Lissy Moreau's small room was tucked away in a quiet part of Beaumont Hall. It wasn't grand, not like the rooms upstairs where the family lived, but it was hers. Sunlight, soft and golden like honey, spilled through the single window, painting stripes across the worn wooden floor. And then there was the scent of old paper and dried lavender, a smell she loved. Lissy sat at her little desk, a slender charcoal stick dancing between her fingers. On the paper, a half-finished sketch of a robin, its head cocked, seemed almost ready to burst into song. She loved birds, didn't she? They were free. This was her secret time, her stolen peace before the day's duties as companion to the Dowager Viscountess Sterling began. Sometimes, instead of sketching, she'd visit the conservatory. It was a magical place, a glass palace filled with green and growing things. The air in there was warm and damp, thick with the perfume of unseen blossoms and rich earth. Today, a new fern needed tending. Its delicate fronds, like green lace, were unfurling slowly. Lissy touched a leaf, so soft, so alive. "There you go, little one," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "You just need a little encouragement." Her own dreams felt like that fern sometimes, curled tight, waiting for the right moment to open up. Because she knew, deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted more than this quiet, ordered life. Not just more money or a different job, but something for her. Something about art, about creating. But how? That was the question that always floated, unanswered like a mote of dust in the sunbeams. Maybe it was fate that she found a discarded art journal in a dusty corner of the library months ago. Its pages were filled with breathtaking landscapes and studies of light, igniting a spark she hadn't known existed within her. She practiced in secret, her heart thumping whenever she heard footsteps approach her room. Was it wrong to want something for herself? Still, her sketches were getting better. Her lines grew more confident, her shading more nuanced. She was content, yes, serving Lady Eleanor, who was mostly kind. But a tiny voice, persistent as a dripping tap, whispered of exhibitions, of her name beneath a picture, of a life painted in bolder colors. For now, these quiet moments, these sketches, these plants, they were her solace. But the yearning? Oh, the yearning was a small, warm coal glowing brighter each day. She didn't know what scared her more, the thought of never achieving her dreams, or the thought of actually trying. This longing for creative fulfillment was a secret garden she tended with as much care as the Dowager's prize-winning roses. And so, she carefully put her sketchbook away, tucking her dreams back into the shadows as the clock in the hall chimed the hour. It was time to be Lissy Moreau, companion. The quiet corner of her room, which had felt like a haven, now seemed a little smaller as she prepared to step out into the wider world of Beaumont Hall, a world that was about to be stirred by an arrival. Moments later, Lissy made her way towards the servants' dining hall. The air down here was always a mix of things. Beeswax polish from the grander rooms, baking bread from the kitchens, and today, a crackle of something else. Excitement. It was almost a taste in the air, sharp and fizzy. The kitchens were already a hive of activity. Pots clanked, and Mrs. Davies, the cook, her face flushed red as a summer beet, barked orders. "Quick now, Martha. Them potatoes won't peel themselves. The young Viscount will be wanting his luncheon prompt, I shouldn't wonder." Lissy slipped into the dining hall, a large plain room with long wooden tables. Sarah, a housemaid with kind eyes and a smile always ready, waved her over. "Lissy, you heard then?" Sarah's voice was a conspiratorial whisper, even though the room buzzed like a disturbed beehive. "Heard what, Sarah?" Lissy asked, though a pretty good guess was forming in her mind. "Lord Damien, he's due back today. Before lunchtime, they say." Sarah's eyes were wide. "Oh, it's been an age since he was last home for more than a fleeting visit. What do you reckon he's like now?" Old Tom, the under-butler, who'd seen Viscounts come and go like seasons, grunted from his corner. Stern. Always was, always will be. Got that look about him, like he's counting the spoons even when he's talking to you. But then, Mary, one of the younger maids, piped up, her voice a little dreamy. Oh, but he's ever so handsome, Tom. And Mr. Finch, the head groom, says he's a fair master. Says he knows every horse by name and temperament. That's not stern, that's attentive, isn't it? Was it? Lissy wondered. Attentive or just particular? Lissy listened, a small smile playing on her lips. It was always like this when Lord Damien was expected. A flurry of polishing, of airing rooms, of opinions flying like shuttlecocks. Some of the older staff remembered him as a boy, wild and often underfoot. Others, hired more recently, only knew him by reputation. A man who carried the weight of the grand Beaumont estate and its legacy squarely on his broad shoulders. He'd been away for months this time, they said, on some important business in Italy. Or was it France? Truth be told, details were scarce, which only made the whispers more exciting. Well, Lissy said quietly, mostly to herself, I suppose we'll all find out soon enough. Because of that, a strange little flutter started in her own stomach. A mix of curiosity and something she couldn't quite name. She'd only seen him from a distance before, a tall figure disappearing down a corridor or riding out across the grounds. Never up close. He was a presence, an idea, more than a man. What followed was a fresh wave of instructions from Mrs. Pearson, the housekeeper, ensuring every last detail was perfect for the master's return. The whole house seemed to be holding its breath. The whispers painted a confusing picture. A stern master, a fair man, a handsome but distant figure. Lissy found herself more intrigued than she expected, wondering which version of Lord Damien Beaumont would step through the grand doors of Beaumont Hall. By the time the grandfather clock in the main entrance hall struck 11, its chimes echoing like solemn pronouncements, the entire household staff was assembled. Or so it felt. Mrs. Pearson, the housekeeper, stood ramrod straight, her sharp eyes missing nothing, not a stray thread, not a nervous twitch. Lissy stood with Sarah near the back, trying to appear calm, though her heart was doing a funny little jig. The air was thick with anticipation, like the quiet before a summer storm. Sunlight streamed through the towering arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, glittering star. The hall itself was vast, with a checkered marble floor that gleamed, and portraits of Beaumont ancestors looking down with severe expressions. Did they approve of all this fuss? Then, the sound. The distant crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A ripple went through the assembled staff. Heads turned, necks craned. Without warning, the massive oak front doors swung open, pulled by a footman who seemed to stop breathing for a second. And there he was, Lord Damien Beaumont, Viscount Sterling. He was imposing. That was the first word that sprang to Lissy's mind. Tall, broader in the shoulder than she'd imagined, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that spoke of London, of business, of a world far removed from the quiet countryside. His dark hair was slightly rumpled, perhaps from the journey, but it only made him look less like a portrait and more real. His face was all angles and shadows, a strong jaw, a straight nose, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at a single glance. He wasn't smiling. In fact, he looked tired, preoccupied, his brow furrowed as he handed his gloves and a slim briefcase to Mr. Hawthorne, the ever-present, ever-silent butler. Hawthorne. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying easily in the large space. Any pressing matters that couldn't wait for an email? Everything is in order, my lord, Hawthorne replied, his tone perfectly neutral. Welcome home. Damien nodded curtly, his gaze sweeping over the staff. It wasn't a warm look, not exactly. It was more an acknowledgement, a brief inventory. Lissy found herself holding her breath. As his eyes moved, they passed over her, hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, or did she imagine it, and then moved on. In that moment, that fleeting, almost imperceptible pause, their eyes met, just for a blink, a spark, like flint on steel, unexpected and startling. Her cheeks warmed instantly. Her heart skipped. His expression didn't change, not really, but she felt it, clear as day, a sudden, sharp awareness. Then, just like that, the moment was gone. He was already turning to speak to his mother, the Dowager Viscountess, who had appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting on the polished banister. Lissy quickly looked down at her own hands, her pulse racing. It was nothing, she told herself. A trick of the light. He was the Viscount, she was merely staff. But the image of his eyes, dark and intense, lingered. Without another word exchanged between them, the brief encounter left a curious imprint, a tiny question mark hanging in the air. The master was home, and somehow Beaumont Hall felt different already. This brief, almost non-existent encounter, however, set a subtle current in motion, one Lissy couldn't quite understand but felt nonetheless as she awaited her duties concerning his return. Later that afternoon, Lissy was summoned to the Dowager Viscountess Eleanor's private sitting room. This chamber, unlike the imposing grandeur of the main hall, was filled with a more personal warmth, though still undeniably elegant. Floral chintz covered the comfortable armchairs, and delicate porcelain figures graced the mantelpiece. Yet today, the air felt a little more charged, a little less restful. Lady Eleanor sat by the window, a cashmere shawl draped over her still regal shoulders, though Lissy noted the familiar tremor in her hands as she held a teacup. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and her eyes, though perhaps a little faded with age, were as sharp as ever. "Ah, Isabelle, my dear," Lady Eleanor said, her voice retaining its musical, aristocratic tone. Come in, come in." Lissy curtsied. "You wish to see me, my lady?" "Indeed." Lady Eleanor set her cup down with a soft clink. "As you know, my son Damien has returned, and with his return there are, of course, certain adjustments to be made. Things must be just so for him." She emphasized the words, her gaze pointed. "He has been managing the family's affairs abroad, a great burden, and he requires absolute peace and order here at Beaumont Hall. It is his sanctuary, after all." Lissy nodded, understanding perfectly. The smooth running of the household was paramount, especially when the Viscount was in residence. Because of that, every member of staff felt the pressure to perform flawlessly. "His private study," Lady Eleanor continued, her eyes flicking towards a heavy oak door at the far end of her sitting room, a door Lissy had never seen open, "has been largely untouched during his extended absence. I want you to ensure it is prepared to his precise liking. Dust everything, of course, but more importantly, ensure his books are in order, his papers undisturbed unless absolutely necessary for cleaning, and that the general atmosphere is conducive to his work." She paused. "Damien has always been particular about his personal space. Not only that, he values his privacy immensely." Lissy felt a small thrill, mixed with a touch of apprehension. The study. It felt like being allowed a peek into a secret room. "Of course, Lady Eleanor. I will see to it immediately. Are there any specific instructions regarding his preferences?" "Mr. Hawthorne will have a general list, but you, Isabelle," and here the dowager's gaze softened ever so slightly, "you have a good eye, a sense of propriety and quiet diligence. I trust you to understand what is required without needing every detail spelled out. Perfection, Isabelle. That is what is required." Her words, though gently spoken, carried the weight of undeniable expectation. Perfection. "I understand, my lady," Lissy replied, her voice calm, though inside, a little voice wondered what secrets the Viscount's study held. "I will not disappoint you." "I know you won't, dear." Lady Eleanor offered a rare, fleeting smile. "Now run along. He will likely wish to use it this evening." Truth be told, Lissy was eager to see the room, a space that belonged wholly to the enigmatic Lord Damien. It felt like another piece of the puzzle that was the master of Beaumont Hall. As she left the dowager's presence, Lissy couldn't help but feel that this task was more than just cleaning. It was a small window into the world of the man whose brief glance had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The prospect of entering his private domain, a room meant for his eyes only, created a sense of anticipation for what she might discover within those walls. The next morning, Lissy approached Damien's study with a soft cloth and a pot of beeswax polish. Her heart did a little flutter kick against her ribs. This room, it felt different from any other in Beaumont Hall. It was his. She pushed the heavy oak door, and it swung inward with a quiet sigh. And then, she stepped inside. The air was still, scented with old leather, aged paper, and a faint, masculine aroma that was uniquely Damien's. Bookshelves, dark and tall as forest trees, lined every wall, crammed with volumes of all sizes. A huge mahogany desk stood before a tall window that looked out onto the rolling parkland, papers neatly stacked, a heavy silver inkstand gleaming. It was a room that spoke of a keen intellect, of quiet contemplation, and perhaps of a hidden depth. Lissy set to work, her movements careful, respectful. She dusted the long shelves, her fingers brushing against the spines of books on law, on history, on art. One particularly large volume, bound in rich green leather, was slightly askew. It was a monograph on Italian Renaissance painters. Her fingers itched to open it. Instead, with a gentle touch, she straightened it, aligning its spine perfectly with its neighbors. He would appreciate order, wouldn't he? She was just polishing the wide surface of the desk, its wood glowing like dark honey under her cloth, when the door creaked. Lissy froze. Her breath caught. Lord Damien Beaumont stood in the doorway. His presence filled the room instantly, shrinking its generous proportions. He was dressed less formally today, in riding breeches and a linen shirt, open at the collar. It made him seem younger, more approachable, and yet, somehow more dangerous too. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. Oh, why did he have to come in now? "Forgive me," Lissy stammered, her cheeks instantly hot. "My lady, Lady Eleanor asked me to prepare the study." His gaze swept the room, cool and appraising. "So I see." His voice was low, even. He walked further into the room, his boots making a soft sound on the polished floorboards. He didn't look at her again, not directly. Instead, his eyes scanned the bookshelves. They stopped, right where she had straightened the art book. Lissy held her breath. Had she done something wrong? He reached out a long-fingered hand and lightly touched the spine of that very book. He didn't pull it out. He just touched it. Then he turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the light from the window. A curt nod. Just one. Barely perceptible. Approval. Or dismissal. Before she could move, before either could speak, he walked to his desk, picked up a sheaf of papers, and then, without another word, he was gone. The air settled. Lissy let out a shaky breath. Her body moved on instinct, a slight shiver passing through her. What was that? That tiny nod? It felt like a secret message she couldn't quite decipher. But it was something. And it was definitely about the art book. Because of that, a tiny, hopeful bird seemed to flutter its wings in her chest. He had noticed. He had noticed something she had done. The encounter was brief. So brief, yet it left an indelible mark. A silent question hanging in the rich book-scented air of his private world. A few days later, Lissy was in Lady Eleanor's chambers, reading aloud from a book of poetry. The Dowager Viscountess had been quiet lately, her gaze often distant, a little sad. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, and the only sounds were Lissy's voice and the gentle tick-tock of the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. Suddenly, Lady Eleanor sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across paving stones. "That's enough for today, Isabelle, dear," she said, her voice thin. "My mind wanders." Lissy closed the book. "Are you quite well, my lady?" Lady Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. though her eyes were troubled. Oh, the usual aches and concerns of an old woman. She paused, then looked directly at Lissy, a surprising intensity in her gaze. It's Damien. He worries me. Lissy's heart gave a little jump. Lord Damien, my lady? Is he unwell? Not unwell in body, no, Eleanor Beaumont said, slowly twisting the rings on her frail fingers. But he carries so much, Isabelle. The estate, the family name. It's a heavy burden for one man. She looked out the window, her voice dropping. He needs a wife, a partner, someone to stand with him to share the load, and of course to provide an heir for Beaumont Hall. This was a familiar refrain, but today it felt more urgent. Lissy remained silent, her hands clasped in her lap. What could she possibly say? Lady Annelise Cromwell is coming to visit next month, Eleanor continued almost to herself. Her father, Lord Cromwell, is an old friend of my late husband. Annelise is suitable, very suitable, beautiful, well-connected, from an impeccable family. A hopeful note entered her voice. They would make a fine match, don't you think? She would be a great asset to him, to all of us. Lady Annelise Cromwell. The name sounded so grand, so perfect. Lissy pictured a tall, elegant woman with disdainful eyes, and then an unexpected pang, sharp and sudden as a wasp sting, went through her. It was ridiculous, utterly absurd. Why should she feel anything at all? Lord Damien's marriage plans were no concern of hers. He was the Viscount. She was a companion, worlds apart. Still, the pang was there, a dull ache she couldn't ignore. She sounds admirable, my lady, Lissy managed, her voice carefully neutral. Because she knew her place, she had to agree, or at least not disagree. Admirable, yes, Eleanor echoed. And she understands society, understands what is expected. Damien can be so solitary, so lost in his work. He needs someone like Annelise to draw him out, to ensure the Beaumont name continues to shine. The dowager leaned forward slightly. He listens to you sometimes, Isabelle, in his own way. He respects your quiet sense. Perhaps when Lady Annelise arrives, you might subtly encourage the association. For his own good, you understand. For the good of this family. Lissy felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Encourage him towards another woman? Could she do that? Deep down, she knew the truth. The thought was surprisingly painful. This conversation opened a new, unsettling awareness of her own barely formed feelings. The dowager's plea, born of maternal love and societal expectation, left Lissy with a disquieting sense of her own insignificance in the grand scheme of Lord Damien's life, and a new, unwelcome emotion to grapple with. What followed were days where Lissy tried to push Lady Eleanor's words and her own strange reaction to the back of her mind. She focused on her duties, on her sketching, on the quiet rhythm of Beaumont Hall. One afternoon, she was in the grand library, a magnificent room with towering arched windows and the hushed reverence of a cathedral. The scent of old books and lemon oil hung in the air. She was selecting new titles for Lady Eleanor, her fingers tracing the embossed gold lettering on a worn leather spine. It was a volume by Ruskin, the art critic. She smiled faintly. Lady Eleanor, despite her traditional views, had a surprising fondness for his passionate prose. An excellent choice, though perhaps a little fervent for my mother's usual tastes. Lissy jumped, nearly dropping the heavy book. Her heart leaped into her throat. Lord Damien stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a towering bookshelf, an open book in his own hand. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved like a shadow when he chose to. How long had he been watching her? My lord, she exclaimed softly, her cheeks flushing. I didn't see you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, making him look surprisingly boyish for a fleeting second. My apologies. I didn't mean to startle you. Ruskin, is it? He nodded towards the book in her hands. Yes, my lord. Lady Eleanor enjoys his descriptions of light and shadow. Lissy felt awkward, overly formal. Why did he always manage to fluster her so? Indeed, he said, his gaze thoughtful as he looked at the book, then back at her. He has a way of making one see the world differently, doesn't he? As if he peels back a layer to reveal the true essence of things. He spoke more to himself than to her, his voice softer now. Lissy found her own voice, a little breathless. Yes. Exactly so, my lord. I've always thought his words paint pictures more vivid than many canvases. As soon as the words were out, she wished she could snatch them back. Too bold, too familiar. But Damien didn't seem to mind. In fact, his eyes lit with a flicker of genuine interest. You appreciate art then, Miss Moreau? The question hung in the air between them. It was a simple question, yet it felt laden with unspoken things. The class divide was a tangible presence, a high wall separating them. He was the Viscount, master of all this. She was staff. Yet for a moment, standing there among the silent, watchful books, they were just two people who understood the power of art. I find beauty in it, my lord, she replied carefully. And truth. He held her gaze for a beat longer. The air thickened. Beauty and truth, he repeated softly. A worthy pursuit. Then, as if remembering himself, his expression became more reserved. He nodded once, a gesture that was becoming familiar. My mother is fortunate to have your thoughtful companionship, Miss Moreau. And just like that, the wall was back, firmly in place. He turned and walked away, disappearing among the towering shelves, leaving Lissy with a rapidly beating heart and a sense of something, a spark, a connection that had nothing to do with duty or position. This brief exchange in the quiet sanctuary of the library, however, lingered in Lissy's mind, a surprising point of light that hinted at a world of shared understanding, even if it seemed impossibly out of reach. That night, the formal dining room at Beaumont Hall gleamed under the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. Silverware shone, porcelain gleamed, and the long, polished mahogany table reflected the flickering candlelight like a dark, still lake. Lady Eleanor presided at one end, regal and composed. Lord Damien sat to her right, listening with polite attention as she recounted some local news. Lissy was present, as was often her duty, seated a little way down the table, ostensibly as a companion to the dowager, but mostly feeling like a very small boat in a very large ocean. She was there to make herself useful if needed, to ensure Lady Eleanor had everything she required, to be unobtrusive. Tonight, however, being unobtrusive felt like an impossible task. No matter how hard she tried to focus on her plate, on the polite murmur of conversation, her awareness of Lord Damien was a constant thrum beneath her skin. He was dressed formally again, the severe lines of his black dinner jacket emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders, the stark white of his shirt making his tanned skin look even darker. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his deep voice seemed to vibrate in the very air. He was discussing estate matters with his mother now, something about tenant farmers and crop yields. Lissy tried to appear absorbed in crumbling her bread roll. It was safer that way, because every so often she could feel his gaze. It wasn't an overt stare. It was a drift, a flicker, as if his eyes, while he was speaking to his mother or looking down at his plate, would just slide in her direction for a heartbeat, then away again. At first she thought she was imagining it. Why would he look at her? But then, it happened again, and again. Each time, a little jolt went through her. Her cheeks warmed. Her breath hitched. Was he looking at her? Really looking? She chanced a quick glance up from beneath her lashes. He was listening to Lady Eleanor, his head inclined respectfully. Safe. She looked back down at her plate, and then she felt it again, that subtle shift of his attention. As if pulled by a string, her gaze lifted. The moment their eyes locked, it was for a fraction of a second longer this time. No mistaking it. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, held a new intensity, a spark of something she couldn't name but that made her heart skip a beat. A beat later, a slow blush crept up her neck, flooding her cheeks with warmth. He saw it. She knew he did. A tiny muscle flickered in his jaw before he smoothly turned back to his mother, resuming the conversation as if nothing had happened. Lissy's own heart was hammering like a trapped bird. Her fork clattered softly against her plate. She quickly picked it up, hoping no one had noticed her clumsiness. But the heat lingered on her skin. The image of his eyes burned into her mind. The space between them burned. It was a silent conversation, a stolen moment in the midst of ritual and formality. Forbidden and utterly thrilling. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur for Lissy, the stolen glances creating a secret, electrifying current beneath the surface of the evening, promising a complication she was both drawn to and deeply afraid of. A few sunny afternoons later, Lissy found herself in the sprawling estate gardens tasked with delivering a message from Lady Eleanor to Mr. MacLeod, the head gardener. The air was sweet with the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. Bees hummed like tiny furry motors, darting between blooms. As she rounded a high yew hedge, a commotion near the stables made her pause. A young stable lad, no more than 15, was struggling with a nervous bay mare. The horse, its eyes wide and white-rimmed, ears flattened back, was pulling against the lead rope, its hooves dancing skittishly on the cobblestones. The lad, red-faced and flustered, was clearly losing control. "Whoa now, Daisy! Whoa, girl!" he pleaded, his voice cracking. Before she could think, Lissy's body moved on instinct. She set her message basket down. "Easy there," she said, her voice calm and low, approaching slowly, not directly at the horse but from the side. "What's got her so upset, Billy?" The boy looked relieved to see a friendly face. "Don't know, Miss Moreau. She were fine a moment ago, then a pheasant flew up right under her nose. Now she won't settle, and I'm meant to be taking her to the farrier." The mare tossed her head, snorting, her nostrils flared. Lissy kept her voice soft, a gentle murmur. "Hello, Daisy," she cooed, extending a careful hand, palm up. "Such a pretty girl. Nothing to be scared of now, is there? Just a silly bird." She didn't try to grab the reins. Instead, she just stood there talking, her presence a calm anchor in the horse's fear. Slowly, very slowly, the mare's ears began to flicker forward. The wildness in her eyes softened just a fraction. Lissy hummed a little tune, something her own mother used to sing. Amazing how animals sensed fear. But also calm, wasn't it? Unseen by Lissy, Lord Damien had been walking from the main house towards the stables to select his afternoon mount. He'd stopped at the edge of the stable yard, watching the scene unfold. He saw the young lad's panic, the horse's genuine fear, and then he saw Miss Moreau. He'd expected her to hurry past, perhaps call for more experienced help. Instead, she handled the situation with a quiet competence that surprised him. Her voice, her posture, her patient focus on the distressed animal, it was remarkable. He saw the mare's tension visibly ease under her gentle influence. He saw the horse lean, just slightly, towards her calming presence. It wasn't just kindness, it was an intuitive understanding, a quiet strength he hadn't fully registered before. This was not merely his mother's companion. This was a woman of unexpected depth. Eventually, Daisy let out a long, shuddering sigh and stood still, her muzzle nudging Lissy's offered hand. Lissy smiled and gently stroked the mare's velvety nose. "There now," she murmured. "All better." She then helped Billy take a firmer, calmer hold of the lead rope. "Just walk her slowly, Billy. Talk to her. She'll be fine." The boy, immensely grateful, stammered his thanks. Lissy simply smiled and picked up her basket, turning to leave. And then, her eyes met Damien's. He was leaning against a stone pillar, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. For a moment, neither spoke. The air crackled with a different kind of tension now. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod, his gaze lingering on her longer than usual before he pushed himself off the pillar and headed into the stables. Lissy's heart did a little flip. That look, it was different. It wasn't just polite acknowledgement. It was something more. Something interested. The brief, unspoken exchange left Lissy feeling strangely warm, his silent observation a more potent acknowledgement than any words could have been, subtly altering the landscape of her thoughts about him. A couple of days after the incident at the stables, Lissy was tidying Lady Eleanor's private sitting room. The dowager was resting, and Lissy had a few moments to herself. She'd been sketching earlier in her little room, a quick study of the light falling through the conservatory leaves, and had tucked her small, worn sketchbook into the pocket of her apron, meaning to put it away properly later. As she plumped cushions, it must have slipped out. Without noticing, she left the room to fetch fresh linen water. Meanwhile, Lord Damien, seeking a moment with his mother, entered the empty sitting room. His eye was immediately caught by the small, unassuming sketchbook lying half-hidden beneath a side table. Curiosity, a trait he usually kept well in check, got the better of him. What was this? He picked it up. It fell open to her most recent sketch. The conservatory leaves, rendered with a delicate, almost ethereal quality. Light and shadow played across the page with surprising skill. He frowned, intrigued. He turned a page. A robin, so lifelike it seemed ready to fly. Another page, a study of hands, gnarled and old, probably Mr. Hawthorne's, capturing their character perfectly. And then a quick, candid sketch of his mother, caught in a moment of laughter, a look he hadn't seen on her face in years. His breath caught. This wasn't just idle doodling. This was talent. Real, raw talent. The lines were sure, the observations keen, the emotion palpable. Who? He flipped back to the first page. In small, neat script, Isabelle Moreau. Miss Moreau? His mother's quiet, observant companion? He felt a jolt, a profound sense of surprise, then a deep, undeniable impressiveness. He had seen glimpses of her intelligence, her kindness. But this revealed a hidden, passionate inner world. Because of this discovery, his perception of her shifted yet again, dramatically. This wasn't just a competent employee. This was an artist. Later that day, Lissy was in the West Gallery, a long room filled with portraits of stern-faced Beaumont ancestors ostensibly dusting. Truth be told, she was often drawn here, studying the brushwork, the use of color. Miss Moreau. His voice, close behind her, made her jump and whirl around, a feather duster clutched like a weapon. "My lord, you startled me." He held up her sketchbook. Her sketchbook, her face flooded with color. Oh, mortification. Her private thoughts, her clumsy attempts exposed. I must have dropped it," she stammered, reaching for it. But he didn't hand it back immediately. Instead, his dark eyes, usually so guarded, were alight with a keen, searching interest. "These are yours?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Lissy could only nod, her gaze fixed on the scuffed cover of her book. "They are. Just trifles, my lord, for my own amusement." "Trifles?" He opened it to the sketch of his mother. "You call this a trifle?" There was no reprimand in his tone, only a genuine, almost awed curiosity. "You've captured her, Miss Moreau. Truly captured her. The way she used to laugh. Before." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. Then he looked directly at her. "You have a remarkable gift." Her heart swelled. His words, so unexpected, so sincere, were like balm to a secret wound. "Thank you, my lord," she whispered. "Have you had formal training?" She shook her head. "No, my lord. Just observation and practice." "Then your eye is exceptionally keen," he stated matter-of-factly. He finally handed the sketchbook back to her. "Don't dismiss it as a trifle, Miss Moreau. Such talent should be nurtured." In that moment, the vast social gulf between them seemed to shrink, replaced by a shared understanding, a mutual respect for the power of art. The conversation was brief, yet it was the first truly personal one they'd ever had. His unexpected praise, his genuine interest in her art, echoed in Lissy's mind long after he'd left, creating a new, fragile bridge of connection between them. One built not on duty or station, but on shared passion. That night, Lissy couldn't sleep. Her mind was a whirl of images. Damien's intense gaze as he spoke of her art, the surprising softness in his voice, the memory of his hand brushing hers. No, that hadn't happened yet, but the thought of it. She sighed, tossing off the covers. Perhaps a turn in the cool, quiet conservatory would soothe her restlessness. The great house was silent, wrapped in shadows and moonlight. As she slipped into the glass-domed haven, fragrant with night-blooming jasmine and damp earth, she saw a figure standing by the fountain silhouetted against the moon-drenched glass. Her heart leaped. Lord Damien. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Miss Moreau," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're abroad late." "As are you, my lord," she replied softly, a strange calm settling over her initial surprise. Maybe it was fate that brought them both here. "I couldn't sleep." "Nor I," he admitted. He gestured to a stone bench nearby. "The air is clearer here, don't you think?" She sat, a little distance from him. The only sounds were the gentle splash of the fountain and the distant hoot of an owl. For a while they sat in comfortable silence. Then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Your sketches today, they made me think about a life lived observing rather than participating." Lissy tilted her head. "And which do you feel you do, my lord?" A humorless smile touched his lips. "A great deal of the latter, I fear. Duty has a way of dictating the terms of one's existence." He looked out at the moonlit gardens. "Sometimes I wonder what path I might have chosen, had I been free to choose." His words, so open, so vulnerable, surprised her. This wasn't the stern, formal Viscount. This was a man, wrestling with his own burdens. "And what path would that have been?" she asked gently. He was silent for a moment. Something quieter, perhaps. Something involving creation, not just administration. He glanced at her. "Like your art, Miss Moreau. To make something beautiful, something true. There's an honesty in that." "And what of your ambitions, my lord?" Lissy found herself asking, emboldened by the darkness, by his unexpected candor. "My ambitions?" He gave a short laugh. "My ambitions are largely tied to this pile of stone and the lands around it. To see it prosper, to honor my father's legacy, to not fail." The weight in his voice was palpable. "And your quiet ambitions, Miss Moreau?" he countered, turning the question back on her. "Beyond capturing my mother's likeness?" Lissy hesitated. Then, the words came tumbling out, whispers in the fragrant darkness. She spoke of her yearning for more than just quiet contentment, her dream of one day seeing her art mean something, of finding a voice. He listened, truly listened, his focused attention a warm embrace. The air between them crackled with unspoken things, with a deep emotional connection that was forming, thread by invisible thread. With every heartbeat, the awareness of him, so close in the darkness, grew. The late-night confidences, whispered in the moonlit conservatory, wove a new tapestry of understanding and shared vulnerability between them, deepening their connection far beyond what either of them could have anticipated. The first hint of dawn was painting the eastern sky in pale hues of rose and gray, when they finally stirred from the stone bench in the conservatory. The world outside was still asleep, but within the glass walls, something profound had shifted between Lissy and Damien. They had talked for hours, sharing hopes and fears, dreams and duties, in a way that transcended their usual roles. Now, an exhausted, tender silence hung between them. "I should," Lissy began. her voice husky with lack of sleep and unshed emotion. "Lady Eleanor will be waking soon." "Yes," Damien agreed, his own voice deeper than usual. "And the house will stir." He rose, and Lissy followed suit, feeling strangely lightheaded yet more grounded than she had in a long time. They walked together without speaking, through the silent, shadowy corridors of Beaumont Hall. The air was cool, and Lissy shivered slightly, though not from the cold. As they reached the foot of the main staircase, the one that led up to the family's private wing, and the smaller passage that led to her own modest room, they paused. This was where they would part. Back to their separate worlds. The unspoken reality of their different stations hung heavy in the air. "Thank you, Miss Moreau," Damien said, his voice low, "for listening." "And you, my lord," she replied, her gaze meeting his. In the dim pre-dawn light, his eyes were dark pools, holding an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, but that made her breath catch. She turned to go, a sense of melancholy settling over her. This night had been a beautiful, impossible dream. Before she could move more than a step, he said her name, just her first name, a soft caress in the stillness. "Isabelle." She stopped, turning back. He had taken a step closer. The space between them burned. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Without thinking, as if pulled by an invisible string, he reached out, perhaps to steady her, perhaps just to touch. His fingers brushed against hers, a jolt. Pure electricity. It shot up her arm, a searing, undeniable spark that made her gasp. Time stood still. Her breath caught. His eyes widened fractionally, reflecting the same shock she felt. His skin was warm, his touch firm, yet gentle. For a breathless moment, their fingers remained entangled, a fragile connection in the vast, sleeping house. The air thickened, charged with a sudden, potent awareness. It was more than just a touch. It was a recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the powerful, forbidden desire that had been simmering beneath the surface. Then, as quickly as it happened, it was over. They pulled apart, flustered, their cheeks flushed. Her name hung in the air. Damien started, then stopped, his voice hoarse. "Good night, my lord," Lissy whispered, her voice trembling, and fled down the passage towards her room, her whole body tingling, her mind reeling. That fleeting, accidental touch, a mere brush of skin on skin, was the spark that ignited the true, undeniable flame of their forbidden desire, leaving them both shaken and irrevocably aware of the dangerous path that lay before them. The morning after the lingering touch at the staircase, a fragile, unspoken awareness hummed between Lissy and Damien. It was there in the way their eyes met fleetingly across the breakfast room, in the heightened sensitivity to each other's presence. Lissy felt as though she were walking on air, a dangerous, thrilling buoyancy in her steps. But then, Lady Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice bright with an almost girlish excitement, effectively shattering the delicate spell. "I have some rather wonderful news, Damien dear," she announced, beaming at her son. Mr. Hawthorne, ever discreet, refilled coffee cups with silent precision. "I received a letter this morning from Celia Cromwell. Annelise is going to bless us with her presence. She's accepted my invitation for an extended visit, starting next week." The name, Lady Annelise Cromwell, dropped into the quiet atmosphere of the breakfast room like a stone into a still pond. Ripples of consequence spread instantly. Lissy's stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. Her breath caught. That sense of dread she'd felt before, when Lady Eleanor first mentioned the name, returned with a vengeance, sharp and unwelcome. Next week? So soon? Damien, however, remained perfectly stoic. He placed his coffee cup down with a steady hand. "Annelise," he said, his tone even, betraying nothing. "That is unexpected. It has been some years." "Exactly," Lady Eleanor trilled, clearly misinterpreting his reserve as pleased surprise. "Far too long. She has grown into such a poised and accomplished young woman. And so beautiful, Damien. It will be delightful to have some youthful vivacity in the house again, don't you agree? Damien offered a non-committal. Indeed, Mother. The house has been rather quiet. His eyes, however, flickered towards Lissy for the briefest of moments, a glance so quick she might have imagined it, yet it seemed to carry a shadow of something. Regret? Warning? She couldn't tell. Lissy kept her gaze fixed on her plate, the uneaten portion of toast suddenly looking like cardboard. The news hung heavy in the air, a palpable weight. Because of Eleanor's obvious delight, it was clear this visit was more than just a casual stay. It was an orchestrated move, a mother's hopeful gambit in the game of suitable matches. She felt it, clear as day. This was a deliberate step to push Damien towards the perfect wife. Her own fragile budding hopes seemed to wither like frostbitten flowers. What chance did a quiet companion, an artist with secret dreams, have against a beautiful, well-connected lady? The silence stretched, thick with unspoken thoughts and anxieties. Even the birdsong outside the window seemed to fade. This impending arrival felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. The Dowager's cheerful plans for Lady Annelise's visit cast a long, ominous shadow over Lissy's heart, making the unspoken connection with Damien feel even more precarious and forbidden. The following Tuesday, Beaumont Hall was abuzz with a different kind of energy, an anticipatory hum that Lissy found deeply unsettling. She tried to busy herself with her duties, with tending to Lady Eleanor, but her thoughts kept straying to the grand entrance hall, where the rival was due to make her appearance. And then, precisely at the appointed hour, the sound of an expensive motor car crunching on the gravel driveway announced her arrival. Mr. Hawthorne, his posture even more immaculate than usual, signaled to the footman. The great oak doors swung open. Lady Annelise Cromwell swept in. She was, Lissy had to admit with a sinking heart, breathtaking, tall and willowy, with hair the color of spun gold, and eyes a startling shade of sapphire blue. Her traveling ensemble was the height of understated Parisian chic, elegant and impossibly expensive. She moved with an effortless grace, a radiant smile gracing her perfectly shaped lips. It was a smile, however, that didn't quite reach her assessing eyes. She's like a perfectly crafted doll, isn't she? Lissy thought, a touch uncharitably. Eleanor, darling, Annelise cried, her voice melodious as she embraced the Dowager Viscountess with carefully calibrated affection. You haven't aged a day, and Beaumont Hall, it's even more magnificent than I remembered. Damien stepped forward from where he'd been standing beside his mother. Annelise, he said, his voice polite, perhaps a fraction cooler than his mother's effusive greeting. Welcome back to Beaumont. He took her offered hand, bowing slightly over it. Damien. Her smile widened, becoming more genuine, more possessive as her eyes locked onto his. She allowed her hand to linger in his just a moment too long. It has been an eternity. You look, well, very well indeed. Her gaze swept over him, an appreciative glint in her eyes that made Lissy's insides clench. In that moment, Annelise subtly yet unmistakably marked him as hers. Lady Eleanor then gestured towards Lissy, who stood quietly to one side. And this, my dear Annelise, is Miss Moreau, my companion. Isabelle, this is Lady Annelise Cromwell. Annelise's gaze flickered to Lissy. Her smile remained, but it was now a polite, distant curve of the lips. Miss Moreau, she said, her tone perfectly modulated, offering the briefest of nods. How diligent of you to be here. There was an undercurrent there, a swift assessment, a subtle dismissal, as if Lissy were no more important than a piece of the ornate furniture. Lissy curtsied, murmuring a polite, "My lady." She felt small, insignificant, like a sparrow in the presence of a swan. What's worse, Annelise's eyes seemed to categorize her instantly and file her away as unimportant. Lady Annelise's grand entrance, her immediate claiming of Damien's attention, and her cool dismissal of Lissy, set the stage for a new, more complicated dynamic within the walls of Beaumont Hall, filling Lissy with a potent mix of apprehension and an unwelcome spark of defiance. In the days that followed Lady Annelise's arrival, Beaumont Hall seemed to subtly shift on its axis. Annelise was everywhere, her melodious laughter echoing in the corridors, her sophisticated presence gracing every room. She was charming to Lady Eleanor, engaging in witty repartee with Damien at dinner, and effortlessly managed to make Lissy feel like an overlooked shadow. The undermining began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. It wasn't overt cruelty. Annelise was too polished for that. Instead, it was a series of small, carefully placed comments designed to put Lissy firmly in her place. One afternoon, Lissy was in the drawing room, arranging flowers Lady Eleanor had asked for. Annelise swept in, a book in her hand. "Oh, Miss Moreau," she said, her voice light, "still fussing with those? You know, in some households, the companion merely oversees such tasks, rather than performing them herself. One wouldn't want to be mistaken for a housemaid, would one?" Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes were like chips of ice. Lissy's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice even. "Lady Eleanor finds my arrangements soothing, my lady, and I find pleasure in doing them." Because it was one of the few creative outlets she had here, she thought, but didn't say. Damien, who had entered the room behind Annelise, frowned slightly. He'd overheard the exchange. "Annelise," he said, his tone mild but firm. "Miss Moreau's floral arrangements are one of the highlights of Beaumont. My mother particularly values her artistic eye." Annelise turned to him, her expression instantly transforming into one of sweet surprise. "Oh, Damien, darling, of course, I merely meant, well, you understand. Boundaries are so important, aren't they?" Another time, Lissy was in her small workspace, a corner of the morning room Lady Eleanor had allowed her for her correspondence and sketching, when Annelise happened upon her. Lissy had her sketchbook open, quickly trying to capture the way sunlight fell on a silver vase. "Still at your little drawings, Miss Moreau?" Annelise commented, peering over her shoulder with an air of faint amusement. "Such a quaint hobby. Does Eleanor approve of you using your working hours for such diversions?" The implication was clear. Lissy was neglecting her duties. Lissy closed her sketchbook, her heart sinking. "Lady Eleanor is resting, my lady. She encourages me to pursue my interests when she has no immediate need of me." "How indulgent of her," Annelise murmured before drifting away, leaving Lissy feeling shaken and exposed. Damien witnessed some of these exchanges, his expression growing increasingly troubled. He saw the subtle barbs, the way Annelise's words, though seemingly innocuous, were designed to diminish Lissy. He felt increasingly torn. On one hand, Annelise was his mother's guest, a woman he was ostensibly being encouraged to court. On the other, he found himself feeling a surprising surge of protectiveness towards Lissy, an anger at Annelise's casual cruelty. He knew Lissy handled these moments with quiet grace, but he could see the hurt in her eyes, and it bothered him, more than he cared to admit. The constant, subtle pressure from Annelise began to wear on Lissy, making each day a careful navigation of social minefields, while Damien's observation of this dynamic only deepened his internal conflict and his unspoken concern for her. After a particularly trying afternoon, during which Annelise had made several pointed remarks about the proper sphere of a companion in front of other guests, Lissy felt her composure begin to fray. She excused herself, claiming a headache, and sought refuge in a secluded part of the vast gardens, a quiet walled enclosure where the roses grew wild and untamed, much like the emotions churning inside her. Tears pricked at her eyes. She felt so out of place, so vulnerable. Why did Annelise's words sting so much? Was it because deep down they touched on her own insecurities? She sank onto a weathered stone bench, a choked sob escaping her. The scent of roses, usually so comforting, seemed to mock her. She was just a companion after all. What right did she have to feel anything for the Viscount? Footsteps on the gravel path. Her heart leaped. Oh no, please not Annelise again. But it was Damien. He stopped a few feet away, his expression uncharacteristically gentle, his eyes filled with a concern that made her breath catch. "Lissy," he said softly, using her first name again, just as he had that night in the conservatory. "Are you all right?" She quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "My lord, yes, I just needed some air." He knew she wasn't telling the whole truth. He had seen her distress earlier, seen the way Annelise's careless words had struck home. Without another word, he sat beside her on the bench, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Annelise can be thoughtless," he said, his voice low. "Don't let her words trouble you." "It's not just her words, my lord," Lissy whispered, her voice trembling. "It's everything. I don't belong here." "Don't say that," he said, his tone surprisingly fierce. He turned to face her more fully. "You belong here as much as anyone. More than some, perhaps." His gaze was intense, searching. "Your kindness, your intelligence, your art. These things have value, Lissy. Great value." His words were like a balm to her wounded spirit. Someone saw her. Someone understood. He reached out as if to touch her hand, to offer comfort. Damien, are you out here?" Annelise's clear, carrying voice shattered the fragile moment. Without warning, they both froze. Footsteps were approaching, fast. Before either could speak, Damien stood abruptly, his expression instantly becoming more formal, more distant. "We should return," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth. "Mother will be wondering where we are." He turned and strode quickly back towards the main path, leaving Lissy sitting alone on the bench, her heart pounding, the reassurance he'd offered still echoing in her ears, now mixed with the fresh terror of their near discovery. As if fate demanded it, their stolen moments were always fraught with peril. The near interruption, a stark reminder of the risks they were taking, left Lissy breathless, and Damien frustrated. The stolen moment of reassurance now tinged with the bitter taste of danger, and the growing certainty that their feelings could not remain hidden for long. A week into Lady Annelise's visit, Lady Eleanor decided to host an intimate dinner party. Intimate, however, was a relative term at Beaumont Hall. It still meant a dozen influential local gentry, glittering chandeliers, and the oppressive weight of societal expectation. Lissy, in her usual role as quiet attendant to the dowager, felt more like a piece of invisible scenery than ever before. And then, Annelise, radiant in a gown the color of champagne that shimmered with every movement, made her move. She was a consummate performer, and tonight the dining room was her stage. With a charming laugh that drew all eyes to her, she began to reminisce. "Oh, Damien, do you recall that summer we spent at Lord Ashworth's estate? We were practically children." She leaned towards him, her hand briefly, possessively, touching his arm. "You dared me to ride that enormous black stallion, and I, foolish girl, actually did it. You were so cross, so worried, until I came back unscathed. You always did have a protective streak, darling." Damien managed a tight smile. "You were always rather fearless, Annelise." His voice was polite, but Lissy, hyper-aware of his every nuance, detected a strained note. He felt trapped. It was as clear as the crystal goblets on the table. Annelise then turned her attention to their future, or rather, her perceived future with him. "And just imagine, Eleanor," she said, addressing the dowager but ensuring the entire table heard, "when Damien and I finally modernize the East Wing. We were discussing it only yesterday, weren't we, Damien? It has such potential for a nursery, with all that lovely morning light." Lissy's fork clattered softly against her plate. A nursery. The word struck her like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face. Invisible. That's what she was. A ghost at their feast. Damien's eyes briefly met hers across the table, a flicker of something, apology, frustration, before Annelise deftly reclaimed his attention. He looked away, a muscle tightening in his jaw. Lissy knew, deep down, she knew the truth. Annelise was weaving a web, and Damien was caught in its glittering threads. The pain was a sharp, physical ache in her chest. Because of Annelise's words, her own dreams felt like foolish, childish fantasies. To make things worse, Annelise spent the rest of the evening regaling the guests with anecdotes that painted her and Damien as a long-established, perfectly matched pair, leaving Lissy to feel like an insignificant footnote in a story that was rapidly being written without her. The air was thick with Annelise's triumph, and Lissy's heart slowly broke. Lissy endured the rest of the dinner party in a haze of misery. Each charming laugh from Annelise, each polite response from Damien, felt like another twist of the knife. No matter how hard she tried to maintain her composure, the carefully constructed dam around her emotions was cracking. She felt a desperate need to escape, to breathe air that wasn't thick with perfume and unspoken barbs. As soon as the ladies retired to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Lissy murmured a quiet excuse to Lady Eleanor about a sudden headache. Her voice trembled. "Oh, you poor dear," Lady Eleanor said, distracted by Annelise's animated chatter. Yes, run along. Some rest will do you good." Lissy practically fled. Her body moved on instinct, her feet carrying her not to her small room, but out through a side door, into the cool, enveloping darkness of the night. She ran, heedless of the dew-soaked grass wetting the hem of her simple gown, until she reached the old stone folly at the edge of the woods, a place she'd discovered on one of her solitary walks. It was dilapidated, ivy-covered, and wonderfully, blessedly isolated. Here, at least, she could be alone with her heartbreak. She sank onto a crumbling stone bench, and the tears she'd been holding back finally came, hot and heavy. Sobs racked her body. How could she have been so foolish? To dream, even for a moment, that someone like Lord Damien could ever... Meanwhile, back in the drawing room, Damien felt Lissy's absence like a physical ache. He'd seen the growing distress in her eyes throughout dinner, the way Annelise's words had wounded her. He made his excuses to his mother and the other guests, a vague mention of checking on estate matters. But his steps didn't lead him to his study. Instead, a deep, undeniable concern pulled him out into the night. He had a feeling where she might have gone. He'd seen her walking towards the folly before. The moon was a silver sliver in the inky sky as he approached the silhouette of the old building. And then, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of weeping. His heart clenched. He found her there, huddled on the bench, her shoulders shaking. "Lissy?" he said, his voice gentle, barely a whisper. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide and vulnerable in the moonlight. She looked so lost, so utterly devastated. In that moment, all thoughts of propriety, of societal expectation, of Annelise, vanished from his mind. There was only Lissy, and her pain, and an overwhelming urge to comfort her. He didn't know what scared her more in that instant, her raw display of emotion or the look in his eyes. The sight of her distress, so raw and palpable in the secluded quiet of the old folly, shattered the last of Damien's carefully constructed reserve, pulling him towards her with an irresistible force. "Lissy," Damien said again, his voice rough with emotion as he moved closer, sitting beside her on the cold stone. The scent of her, a faint mix of lavender and her own unique fragrance, filled his senses. "What is it? What has upset you so?" "As if you don't know," she choked out, tears still streaming down her face. She tried to pull away, but he gently took her arm. It's everything. Her, you, this impossible situation." Her voice rose, laced with a pain that tore at him. "I can't bear it, Damien. I feel like I'm disappearing." "You are not disappearing," he said, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly. His own carefully controlled emotions were fraying, her distress, her raw honesty. It was undoing him. "Lissy, look at me." She finally met his gaze, her eyes swimming. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you even care?" "Because," he began, then stopped. How could he explain the turmoil inside him? The way she had crept into his thoughts, his dreams. The way her quiet strength, her hidden passion, her vulnerability had captivated him. Because I do, Lissy. More than I should. More than is wise. His voice was a low growl, a confession ripped from his very soul. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken words, with months of stolen glances, shared secrets, and a desire that had become a raging fire. But Annelise, Lissy started, her voice breaking. Annelise is what my mother wishes, what society expects, he cut in, his eyes blazing now, but she is not what I wish for. Between one breath and the next, something inside him snapped. He couldn't bear her pain, couldn't deny the searing call of his own heart any longer. This was madness. It was forbidden. It was inevitable. Before either could speak another word, as if fate demanded it, he leaned in, and his mouth found hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, urgent, a raw claiming, a torrent of pent-up emotion unleashed. Her lips were soft, trembling beneath his. A small, startled gasp escaped her, and then, as if summoned, she was kissing him back, her hands coming up to clutch at his shoulders, her body arching into his. Fire bloomed beneath her skin. The world tilted and spun away. There was only this. His taste, his scent, the rough stubble on his jaw, the possessive strength of his arms around her, pulling her closer, ever closer, until there was no space left between them. The kiss deepened, becoming hotter, wetter, more demanding. His tongue sought hers, a shocking, electrifying intimacy that sent shivers down her spine. He groaned, a low, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated need. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him impossibly nearer. Time stood still. The air thickened, heavy with their mingled breaths, with the primal scent of desire. This was not just a kiss. It was a collision, a conflagration, the soundless roar of two souls finally finding their forbidden solace. The desperate, passionate kiss in the moonlit ruins of the old folly was an irrevocable act, a raw and urgent ignition of the forbidden flame that would change everything between them. For better or for worse, they finally broke apart, breathless, gasping for air. Their lips were swollen, their bodies trembling. For a long moment they just stared at each other, shock and a wild, exhilarating thrill warring in their eyes. The silence roared around them, punctuated only by their ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of their hearts. What had they done? The question screamed in the space between them. Lissy's fingers went to her lips, a dazed expression on her face. She could still taste him, feel the imprint of his mouth on hers. Her chest ached with a confusing mix of euphoria and a sudden sharp stab of fear. Damien looked equally stunned, his dark hair disheveled, his usually immaculate cravat askew. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze fixed on her, a maelstrom of emotions swirling in their depths. "Lissy," he began, his voice hoarse. I shouldn't have." "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, don't say that. Because despite the fear, despite the certain chaos this would unleash, that kiss, it had felt more real, more right, than anything she had ever experienced. But the reality of their situation began to crash down on them, cold and undeniable. He was Lord Damien Beaumont, Viscount Sterling, promised, in societal eyes at least, to Lady Annelise Cromwell. She was Isabelle Moreau, his mother's companion. The chasm between their worlds was vast, treacherous. "We can't," he said, the words torn from him. "This, if anyone knew." The implications were terrifying. Her ruin, his scandal, his mother's devastation, Annelise's fury. The thought was a chilling douse of water on the still smoldering embers of their passion. "I know," Lissy said, her voice barely audible. The thrill was rapidly being replaced by a cold dread. "We must be so careful." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek, a touch that was both a caress and a farewell. More than careful, he murmured, his eyes dark with a new kind of pain. This changes everything. And nothing. A paradox that perfectly encapsulated their impossible love. In the quiet that followed, her thoughts spun. What now? Where could they possibly go from here? They stood in the moonlit ruins, the thrill of their stolen passion slowly giving way to the terrifying realization of what they had unleashed. The line had been irrevocably crossed, and though fear was a cold companion, a new, defiant resolve began to smolder in Lissy's heart, mirrored in the haunted depths of Damien's eyes. They were in this together now, for however long it lasted. The days following their first kiss at the Folly were a torment of longing and fear for Lissy and Damien. Stolen glances across crowded rooms, brief, whispered words in passing corridors. These were the meager crumbs on which their burgeoning love had to survive. They yearned for more, for a moment of true privacy. But the ever-watchful eyes of Beaumont Hall, particularly those of Lady Annelise, made any attempt at a secret meeting fraught with peril. One evening, after the household had supposedly retired, Damien signaled to Lissy. A single, almost imperceptible nod towards his study. Her heart leaped. He had left the door to the seldom-used service stairs slightly ajar, a silent invitation. With her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, Lissy slipped from her room, her bare feet making no sound on the cold stone floors. The house was dark, save for the slivers of moonlight filtering through tall windows, painting eerie patterns on the walls. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, to take on a menacing shape. Was this madness? She reached his study. The door was closed but unlocked. She pushed it open a mere inch. "Damien," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. He was there, standing by the fireplace, the embers casting a faint, flickering glow. His face was etched with a mixture of longing and anxiety. "Lissy," he breathed, reaching for her. "I had to see you." But then, footsteps. Soft, measured but undeniably approaching in the main corridor. Lissy froze, her breath caught. Damien's eyes widened in alarm. Without warning, he pulled her swiftly behind a heavy velvet curtain that draped a tall window alcove, pressing her back against the cold glass, his body shielding hers. The space was impossibly small, their bodies pressed so close she could feel the frantic beat of his heart against her own. Her own pulse roared in her ears. The study door creaked open, a sliver of lamplight cut across the room. Lissy held her breath, certain they would be discovered. Peeking through a tiny gap in the curtain, she saw Mr. Hawthorne. The butler paused, his gaze sweeping the room. He seemed to be checking if the fire was safely banked for the night, or perhaps he'd heard something. His expression was, as always, unreadable. For an agonizingly long moment, he stood there. Time stood still. Then, with a satisfied nod, he withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. Only when his footsteps had completely faded did Damien let out a shaky breath, his forehead resting against hers. "That was too close," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Lissy was trembling uncontrollably. The danger, so palpable, so immediate, had terrified her. They stayed hidden for several more minutes, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, replaced by a chilling awareness of just how precarious their situation was. They had escaped this time, but it was a stark, terrifying reminder. The near discovery in Damien's study, a breathless brush with exposure, served as a chilling premonition, heightening their awareness of the constant danger that shadowed their every stolen moment. The terror of their near discovery in the study haunted Lissy and Damien, making them even more cautious, more desperate. Yet their need for each other, a fierce, undeniable hunger, only intensified. A few nights later, Damien found a way. He led Lissy, under the cloak of a moonless night, not to a risky room within the main house, but to a small, disused hunting lodge nestled deep within the Beaumont woods, far from prying eyes and listening ears. It was rustic, a little dusty, but blessedly private. A fire was already laid in the hearth, and a single oil lamp cast a warm, intimate glow over the cozy interior. This was their secret world. "It's not much," Damien murmured, his arm around her waist as he drew her inside. "But it's ours. For tonight." "It's perfect," Lissy whispered, her eyes shining in the lamplight. Here, away from the oppressive grandeur of Beaumont Hall, away from the judging eyes of society and the sharp scrutiny of Annelise, she could breathe. She could be herself. With him. What followed was an encounter born not of frantic urgency, like their first kiss, but of a deliberate, tender exploration of their deepening love and desire. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his gaze worshipping every inch of her skin revealed in the flickering firelight. His touch was hesitant at first, then grew bolder as her soft sighs of pleasure spurred him on. She, in turn, explored him with a shy wonder, her fingers tracing the hard planes of his chest, the strong column of his throat. Their kisses were long, slow, and deep, a languid conversation of lips and tongues, tasting, savoring. "Lissy," he groaned her name against her mouth. "I've dreamed of this, of you." "And you," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, all thoughts of past or future receded. There was only the present, this man, this moment. Their bodies moved together in a rhythm as old as time, a dance of shared passion and profound intimacy. He was gentle, yet fiercely possessive. She was yielding, yet met his ardor with a passion that surprised them both. In the quiet sanctity of their hidden lodge, amidst the crackling fire and the soft sounds of their lovemaking, they shared not just their bodies, but their vulnerabilities, their whispered hopes, their deepest fears. This was more than just physical release. It was a communion of souls, a desperate clinging together in a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. Afterwards, they lay tangled in each other's arms, the scent of wood smoke and their mingled desire clinging to their skin, a fragile peace settling over them. Their secret rendezvous in the secluded lodge became a sanctuary, a precious, stolen world where their passion deepened into a profound intimacy, even as the shadows of risk and societal expectation loomed just beyond its doors. While Lissy and Damien found fleeting solace in their secret encounters, the world outside their hidden bubble continued to turn, and Lady Annelise Cromwell was not a woman to be easily fooled. She had come to Beaumont Hall with a clear objective, to secure Damien as her husband. And she was beginning to sense a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in him, a distraction, a certain remoteness that hadn't been there before. More importantly, she started noticing the way his eyes would occasionally, and far too often for her liking, find Miss Moreau. It was nothing overt, nothing anyone else might remark upon. A lingering glance across the drawing room, a brief, almost unconscious softening of his expression when Lissy entered a room, a certain tension when Lissy was serving his mother her tea. Small things. But Annelise had a keen eye for such nuances, especially where her own interests were concerned. Because of that, her attention, sharp and calculating, began to focus more intently on the quiet companion. She started to watch Lissy more closely, her sapphire eyes missing nothing. She'd make a point of engaging Damien in animated conversation when Lissy was nearby, observing the companion's reaction from the corner of her eye. Did Miss Moreau look away too quickly? Did a faint blush stain her cheeks? One afternoon, during a walk on the grounds, Annelise made a seemingly innocent remark to Damien, loud enough for Lissy, who was a few paces behind with Lady Eleanor, to overhear. "Darling Damien, you seem so preoccupied lately. Is something weighing on your mind? Perhaps you need a more stimulating companion to divert you." Her tone was light, playful, but her eyes, when they flicked towards Lissy for a split second, were cold and assessing. Lissy felt a prickle of unease. It was as if Annelise were setting small, almost invisible traps, testing the air, probing for weaknesses. She tried to appear unaffected, to maintain her quiet, deferential demeanor, but inside, her nerves were stretched taut. She felt like a mouse being watched by a very patient, very beautiful cat. What's worse, she couldn't be sure if Damien noticed Annelise's subtle campaign, or if he was too caught up in their own dangerous secret to see the net slowly closing around them. Annelise's growing suspicions, though unspoken, began to cast a palpable chill over Beaumont Hall, her pointed remarks and watchful gaze a constant, unnerving reminder to Lissy that their secret was perhaps not as well kept as she and Damien desperately hoped. The mounting pressure from Annelise's subtle machinations was not the only storm brewing. One evening, Lady Eleanor summoned Damien to his late father's study, a room usually reserved for the most serious of estate or family matters. The air in the room was heavy, the portraits of stern-faced Beaumont ancestors seeming to look down with particular severity. Lady Eleanor did not waste time with pleasantries. Her expression was grave, her usual regal composure tinged with a deep maternal worry. "Damien," she began, her voice firm but laced with concern, "we need to talk about Lady Annelise." Damien braced himself. He knew this conversation was inevitable. "What about her, mother? She is a wonderful young woman, is she not? Beautiful, intelligent, from an impeccable family, and she is clearly very fond of you." Lady Eleanor paused, her gaze searching his. "Yet I sense a distinct lack of enthusiasm on your part. You are polite, of course, you are always polite, but there is a coolness, a distance. Am I wrong?" Damien shifted uncomfortably. "Annelise is a charming guest, mother. I enjoy her company." It felt like a lie, even as he said it. "Enjoy her company?" Lady Eleanor's voice sharpened. "Damien, this is not merely about enjoying someone's company. This is about your future, about the future of Beaumont Hall. The Cromwells are an influential family. Their connections are invaluable. And truth be told," her voice dropped, a hint of desperation creeping in, "the estate, it is not as secure financially as it once was. Your father left certain burdens. A match with Annelise would secure our future, Damien. It would bring stability. It would bring relief." This was the crux of it, the unspoken weight he had been carrying. This was why his duty felt so heavy. He felt a crushing pressure descend upon him. His mother's words, her genuine fear for their legacy, were like iron bands tightening around his chest. How could he tell her that his heart was already given to another? To someone so unsuitable in her eyes, in the eyes of their world? The conflict within him was a raging inferno. His profound, all-consuming love for Lissy on one side, his ingrained sense of duty, his responsibility to his family and his heritage, on the other. The choice seemed impossible, a path to certain heartbreak no matter which way he turned. He felt trapped, suffocated by expectation and obligation. Lady Eleanor's impassioned plea, her stark reminder of his duties, and the precarious financial state of the estate, left Damien reeling, caught in an agonizing vice between the desperate call of his heart for Lissy and the undeniable weight of his family's expectations and legacy. The air in the formal dining room at Beaumont Hall was thick enough to cut with one of the ornate silver knives. Lady Eleanor, her spine ramrod straight, presided over the small family dinner, herself, Damien, and Lady Annelise, with a determined glint in her eye. Lissy was not present this evening, a small mercy for which she was unknowingly grateful. Annelise, sensing Damien's increasing elusiveness since their near discovery in the garden, had decided it was time to apply more direct pressure. She was like a beautiful, patient huntress, slowly tightening the net. "Damien, darling," Annelise began, her voice as smooth and sweet as honey, yet with an underlying thread of steel. "We've had such a delightful time these past weeks, haven't we? It feels as though I've come home." She smiled at Lady Eleanor, who nodded approvingly. "And it has set me to thinking about the future. Our future." Her gaze rested pointedly on Damien. He shifted in his chair, the fine linen of his shirt suddenly feeling constricting. "The future is always uncertain, Annelise." "Oh, but some things needn't be," she countered sweetly. Connections like ours, Damien, rooted in shared history, shared values, they are the bedrock of a stable future. Wouldn't you agree, Eleanor? Indeed, my dear, Lady Eleanor affirmed, her voice firm. Damien, Annelise is right. It is time to make things more formal. The county is expecting an announcement. An engagement would bring such joy, such stability to us all. Her eyes pleaded with him, but there was an undeniable expectation there too. Because of the estate's financial vulnerability, a fact she'd impressed upon him, this match wasn't just desirable, it was practically a necessity. Damien felt the walls closing in. Annelise's subtle ultimatum, his mother's desperate hope and unwavering expectation. It was a suffocating weight. He looked from one determined female face to the other. How could he explain the wild, impossible love that had taken root in his heart for someone else entirely? How could he voice a commitment to Lissy when societal duty and familial obligation screamed Annelise's name? His silence stretched, heavy, and fraught. He needed time. He needed Lissy. But here, at this table, he was utterly trapped. The silence itself became an answer Annelise didn't like. The unspoken, yet heavily implied ultimatum from Annelise, bolstered by his mother's fervent desire for an engagement, left Damien feeling cornered and desperate, the pressure to conform to their wishes almost unbearable. Days later, the annual Beaumont Village Fête and Charity Ball was in full swing. Marquees dotted the sprawling lawns, laughter and music filled the air, and the local gentry mingled with tenants, all under the benevolent gaze of Beaumont Hall. Damien, as Viscount, was obligated to attend, and Lady Annelise naturally was on his arm. She looked radiant in a gown of pale blue silk, playing the part of the future Viscountess to perfection, her laughter light, her smiles dazzling as she greeted everyone. Damien, however, felt like a man walking a tightrope over a chasm. He performed his duties with a practiced politeness, a charming facade that masked a deep, private agony. His heart wasn't here. It was with Lissy. Lissy was there too, but in a far different capacity. She was assisting Lady Eleanor, who was seated in a place of honor, overseeing the charity stalls. From her vantage point, Lissy had a painfully clear view of Damien and Annelise. She watched them move through the crowd, Annelise's hand possessively tucked into the crook of Damien's arm. She saw Annelise lean in to whisper something in his ear, saw Damien force a smile. Each gesture, each shared glance between them was like a fresh stab to Lissy's already aching heart. She felt invisible, a mere servant girl watching a fairy tale unfold for someone else. Was this her future? To watch him from the sidelines, forever out of reach? No matter how hard she tried to focus on her tasks, her eyes kept being drawn back to him, and his, in turn, kept finding hers. Across the crowded lawn, over the heads of laughing villagers and elegantly dressed ladies their gazes would meet, brief stolen moments heavy with unspoken longing, with apology, with a shared despair. His eyes, dark and tormented, seemed to cry out to her, begging her understanding, her forgiveness. She felt it, clear as day, his pain mirroring her own. But what could she do? What could he do? They were caught in a web of duty and expectation, their love a fragile, secret thing in danger of being crushed. As the sky darkened and lanterns were lit for the evening ball, the sight of Damien leading Annelise in the first dance was almost more than Lissy could bear. Her world tilted. The public spectacle of Damien and Annelise together, his forced attentiveness and her radiant triumph became a source of private agony for both Lissy and Damien. Their stolen, longing glances across the crowded fate a testament to their hidden, breaking hearts. Damien could bear it no longer. The charade of the ball, Annelise's possessive smiles, Lissy's heartbroken eyes watching him from afar. It was a torment that ripped through his carefully constructed composure. Between one breath and the next, something inside him cracked. He made a curt, almost rude excuse to Annelise, leaving her mid-sentence, her eyes wide with surprise and dawning fury. He didn't care. He had to find Lissy. Now. He scanned the crowded ballroom. his gaze sweeping past faces until he found her standing near the refreshment tables looking small and lost. He strode towards her, his purpose unshakable. Before she could react, before she could even register his approach, he took her arm, his grip firm. "Come with me," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. He didn't lead her to some secluded corner of the gardens this time. Instead, he pulled her through a private side door, up a winding servant's staircase, and straight into his own private chambers, the Viscount's sacrosanct domain. He kicked the door shut behind them, the sound echoing the finality of his decision. Lissy stared at him, breathless, her heart hammering. "Damien, what are you— I can't do it, Lissy," he choked out, his face a mask of raw emotion. He paced the room like a caged animal. "I can't pretend anymore. I can't be that man, the one they all expect. Not without you." He stopped before her, his eyes blazing with a desperate, defiant light. "It's you, Lissy. It has always been you. I love you. Consequences be damned, I love you." His words, so raw, so powerful, shattered her. Tears streamed down her face, but these were not tears of sorrow. "Oh, Damien," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I love you too." As if fate demanded it, that was all it took. He surged forward and his mouth crushed down on hers in a kiss that was part desperation, part adoration, all-consuming passion. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a point of no return. This was no hesitant exploration. This was a claiming, a branding, a fusion of two souls who had fought against their destiny for too long. Their clothes seemed to melt away, discarded in a heap on the rich Persian rug. The air thickened, charged with the scent of their desire, with the sound of their ragged breaths and whispered endearments. His hands, his mouth, were everywhere, learning her, worshipping her, igniting fires she never knew she possessed. She met his passion with her own, her body arching to meet his, her fingers digging into the hard muscles of his back. Time stood still. Her world tilted and narrowed to this room, this man, this earth-shattering connection. He lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her to his massive four-poster bed, their lips never breaking contact. What followed was an intimate ballet of passion and tenderness, a desperate, beautiful claiming. It was raw, it was urgent, it was the most profound expression of love either had ever known. A major, steamy scene played out not just in body but in soul, a defiant cry against the world that would keep them apart. In the sanctity of his private chambers, Damien's desperate declaration and their subsequent, intensely passionate union became an irrevocable act, a fiery, emotional climax that bound them together in defiance of all odds, sealing their love with a searing intensity. In the deeply intimate quiet that followed their passionate storm, Lissy and Damien lay tangled together in his bed, the soft glow of the embers in the fireplace casting dancing shadows across their still trembling bodies. The air was thick with the scent of their lovemaking, with unspoken emotions, with the dawning realization of what they had just done. Outside, the sounds of the ball, the distant music and laughter, seemed to belong to another world, another lifetime. Here, in this room, they had created their own universe. Lissy snuggled closer, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart beneath her ear. It was a sound she knew she would never forget. "Damien?" she whispered into the darkness. "Hmm?" His voice was a low rumble, his lips brushing against her hair. "What now?" The question was small, fragile, yet it held the weight of their entire future. He was silent for a long moment, his arms tightening around her. "Now," he said, his voice filled with a new, quiet resolve. "Now, we find a way." She tilted her head back to look at him, her eyes searching his in the dim light. "But how? Your mother, Annelise, society." "I don't have all the answers, Lissy," he admitted, his gaze tender but honest. "I only know that I cannot live without you. That life, the one they have planned for me, It would be a hollow existence if you weren't by my side. He paused, then cupped her face in his hands. We will face it, together. Whatever comes, we will face it. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of hope, of a fierce, burgeoning strength. Together, she echoed, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her. In the stillness that followed, as the echo of their promises hung in the air, they whispered vows not of marriage, not yet, but of commitment. They vowed to be true to each other, to protect their love, to fight for a future where they could be open and free. They knew the path would be incredibly difficult, fraught with obstacles and heartbreak. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, their bond forged in the crucible of forbidden desire and defiant passion, they felt invincible. Their souls answered each other. This was their truth. As dawn approached, painting the sky in soft hues of hope and trepidation, Lissy and Damien clung to each other, their whispered vows in the darkness solidifying their commitment, a fragile promise to navigate the treacherous path ahead, together, no matter the cost. In the stolen, precious hours they managed to find together, often in the dead of night within the supposed sanctuary of Damien's own chambers, their love had deepened into an unbreakable bond. They spoke of a future, a fragile, whispered dream of a life where they wouldn't have to hide. Lissy had even brought her sketchbook one night, sharing her latest drawings, her talent blooming under his encouragement. One particular sketch, a tender portrait of Damien caught in a rare, unguarded moment of laughter, was her favorite. She'd left it on his bedside table, a small token of her love, intending to retrieve it before dawn. But fate, or rather Lady Annelise Cromwell, had other plans. Annelise, her suspicions now a raging certainty, had become a silent, cunning huntress. She'd noticed Damien's late-night restlessness, the way he sometimes seemed to listen for sounds only he could hear. One morning, feigning an early walk to admire the sunrise, she'd seen a flicker of movement near the servants' stairs leading from the main family wing. Her instincts, sharp and predatory, went on high alert. For days, she watched, waited. Then, one pre-dawn morning, after Lissy had slipped away from Damien's rooms, Annelise made her move. She knew Damien would be deeply asleep after such a tryst. With the stealth of a cat, she let herself into his chambers, ostensibly to leave a note about an early ride they'd planned. Her eyes, however, scanned the room with meticulous precision. And there it was, on his bedside table. Not a note from her, but a sketch. A woman's sketch. Of him. Rendered with an intimacy, a tenderness that screamed of a lover's touch. Her breath caught. With trembling fingers she picked it up. The artistry was undeniable, but it was the emotion in the lines, the sheer adoration in the depiction of her Damien that made her blood run cold then hot with a furious, possessive rage. She recognized the style. She'd seen Miss Moreau's quaint hobby before. So the little brown mouse had claws after all. In that moment, everything changed. Annelise had her proof. Undeniable. Devastating. Triumphant. The discovery of Lissy's intimate sketch in Damien's private chambers was the spark that ignited Annelise's fury. A tangible piece of evidence that would unravel their carefully guarded secret and bring the storm crashing down upon them all. Later that morning, Annelise, her face a mask of cold fury, her eyes glittering like ice chips, confronted Damien in his study. She didn't knock. She threw the door open with such force that it banged against the wall, making him jump. In her hand, she held Lissy's sketch like a weapon. "What?" she hissed, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Is the meaning of this?" She slammed the sketch down on his desk. Damien stared at it, his blood running cold. Lissy's drawing. He'd forgotten. "Annelise, don't you dare lie to me, Damien," she spat, her carefully cultivated composure shattering. That servant girl, your mother's companion, in your bed. How could you humiliate me like this? After everything. After all our families have planned." Tears of rage and wounded pride streamed down her face. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you take me for a fool?" Her voice rose to a near shriek. "She will rue the day she ever set foot in this house, and so will you, Damien, so will you." Because her pride was so deeply wounded, her fury knew no bounds. What followed was a torrent of accusations, of recriminations, of threats. Damien tried to speak, to explain, but his words were drowned out by her fury. He felt a wave of guilt, yes, for the pain he had inadvertently caused her, but also a surge of defiance for Lissy, for their love. The commotion inevitably reached Lady Eleanor. Soon after Annelise stormed out, vowing retribution, Eleanor appeared at the study door, her face pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Mr. Hawthorne, it turned out, with his unerring loyalty to the family name and a deep, sorrowful sense of duty, had heard Annelise's raised voice, had seen the sketch, and had felt compelled to inform his mistress of the brewing catastrophe. "Damien?" Eleanor whispered, her hand going to her heart. "What is this? This madness Annelise is screaming about. Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you haven't—" "With Miss Moreau." Her voice broke. This was not anger like Annelise's. This was a deep, profound disappointment, a mother's heartbreak and a terrifying fear for their reputation, for his future. "Oh, Damien," she wept, sinking into a chair. "How could you? After all our hopes, after all my warnings, you have risked everything. Everything." The 1-2 punch of Annelise's explosive fury and Eleanor's devastating disappointment left Damien reeling, the weight of his actions, the exposure of his secret love, crashing down upon him with brutal force. The storm broke over Lissy with shocking speed. She was in her small room trying to quell the nervous flutter in her stomach, a premonition of disaster she couldn't shake since Annelise's chillingly triumphant look at breakfast. Then, a sharp, peremptory knock on her door. It wasn't Sarah. It was Mrs. Pearson, the housekeeper, her face grim, her lips a thin, disapproving line. "Miss Moreau," Mrs. Pearson said, her voice devoid of its usual civility. "The Dowager Viscountess requires your presence in her private sitting room, immediately." Lissy's heart plummeted. She knew. Somehow, she knew this was it. Her hands trembled as she followed Mrs. Pearson through the silent, disapproving corridors of Beaumont Hall. Each step felt like a step towards the gallows. Lady Eleanor was not alone. Lady Annelise stood beside her, her arms crossed, her expression one of cold, vindictive triumph. Eleanor, however, looked utterly broken, her face ashen, her eyes red-rimmed. She clutched a handkerchief in her trembling hands. The damning sketch lay on the small table between them. "Isabelle Moreau," Lady Eleanor began, her voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of profound sorrow and condemnation. "Look at this and tell me it is not what it appears to be." Lissy stared at her drawing of Damien, her cheeks burning with shame. There was no denying it. Her love, her secret, exposed for all to see. She couldn't speak. What could she say? "She can't deny it, Eleanor," Annelise interjected, her voice sharp. "The little viper has been sleeping with your son, under your very roof, deceiving us all." "Annelise, please," Eleanor murmured, though she didn't contradict her. She turned back to Lissy, her eyes filled with a deep, aching sadness that was almost harder to bear than Annelise's open hostility. "Isabelle, I trusted you, I welcomed you into my home, into my confidence, and this is how you repay me?" Her voice cracked. "You have brought shame upon this house, upon my son." Lissy finally found her voice, a tearful whisper. "My lady, I never meant to cause you pain. I love him." "Love?" Annelise scoffed. "You call this love? This sordid, common affair? You are a servant girl. You have ruined him." "Enough, Annelise," Eleanor said, a flicker of her old authority returning. She looked at Lissy, her expression hardening, though the sorrow remained. "There is nothing more to be said. You will pack your belongings, Miss Moreau. You are to leave Beaumont Hall by nightfall. Arrangements will be made for your passage back to—" wherever it is you came from. It was a summary dismissal. Cold, final. The confrontation, swift and brutal, left Lissy stripped of her dignity, her love condemned, her future shattered. The harsh reality of her position, the unforgiving nature of the world she had dared to dream beyond, crashed down upon her with devastating force. The news of Lissy's immediate dismissal reached Damien like a physical blow. He tried to go to her, to speak to his mother, to stop this madness, but he was met with a wall of implacable opposition. Lady Eleanor, her heart hardened by pain and fear of scandal, refused to see him. Annelise, a venomous satisfaction in her eyes, informed him that Miss Moreau was being dealt with, and that he would be wise to stay out of it if he knew what was good for him, and for the little adventuress. He was, effectively, a prisoner in his own home, his movements restricted, his pleas ignored. He was forbidden to see Lissy. Lissy, meanwhile, packed her few belongings in a daze of shock and heartbreak. Her small room, once a haven, now felt like a cage. Sarah, the kind housemaid, came to her, her eyes filled with tears and sympathy, offering what little comfort she could. But there was nothing anyone could do. The decision had been made. As the shadows lengthened and evening approached, a carriage was brought to a side entrance. Lissy, clutching a small, worn valise, her face pale but her chin held with a flicker of a defiance she didn't feel, was escorted out of Beaumont Hall like a common criminal. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Because if she did, she knew her heart would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Damien watched from an upstairs window, hidden behind a curtain, his soul tearing apart. He saw her small, solitary figure climb into the carriage. He saw it pull away, taking with it his heart, his hope, his everything. He slammed his fist against the window frame, a low, anguished cry torn from his throat. He was trapped. Trapped by his name, by his duty, by the societal chains that bound him. All was lost. The guilt was a crushing weight, the despair, a bottomless pit. As the carriage carrying Lissy disappeared down the long drive, a cold, empty silence descended upon Beaumont Hall. For both Lissy and Damien, it felt like the end of the world. She was alone, facing an uncertain, bleak future. The shame of her dismissal, a heavy cloak. He was alone, surrounded by a family that had, in its own way, betrayed him, his love for Lissy a raw, gaping wound. And just like that, everything changed. Their beautiful, fragile world had shattered. The forced separation, swift and brutal, plunged both Lissy and Damien into a chasm of despair, their love seemingly crushed under the weight of societal condemnation and familial duty, leaving them utterly devastated and believing all was lost. In the days that followed Lissy's cruel dismissal, Beaumont Hall became a gilded cage for Damien. The silence she left behind was a deafening roar in his ears, her absence a physical ache in his soul. He moved through his days like a ghost, performing his duties with a mechanical precision that fooled no one, least of all himself. Annelise, though initially triumphant, found him more distant, more unreachable than ever, her victory tasting like ash in her mouth. His mother, Lady Eleanor, watched him with a mixture of sorrow and anxious hope, praying he would come to his senses and accept the match that would secure their future. But Damien was breaking. He spent hours locked in his study, surrounded by the symbols of his heritage, the portraits of his ancestors staring down at him with their stern, judging eyes. Or he would walk the vast estate grounds alone, the wind whipping at his face, his thoughts a raging tempest. Responsibilities, duty, legacy. These words, once the cornerstones of his existence, now felt like chains, binding him to a life he no longer wanted, a life devoid of Lissy, devoid of true happiness. He saw her face in the shifting clouds, heard her voice in the rustling leaves. He remembered her sketches, her quiet strength, her passionate heart, the way she looked at him, the way she saw him. He remembered the stolen moments, the forbidden kisses, the earth-shattering intimacy they had shared. And he knew. Deep down, he knew the truth. He could not live this lie. Not only that, he could not, would not, let Lissy suffer alone for a love that was as much his responsibility as it was hers. What was honor, if it meant sacrificing the only true happiness he had ever known? What was duty, if it meant condemning the woman he loved to a life of shame and solitude? Because of her, he'd tasted a different kind of life, a life of genuine feeling. No matter how hard he tried to reason with himself, to accept his fate, his heart rebelled. The viscountcy, the estate, the family name, they were nothing without her. He had to choose. And in the quiet solitude of his reckoning, staring out at the land that was his birthright, he finally understood what truly mattered. It wasn't the land, or the title. It was Lissy. The agonizing days of internal struggle finally forged a new resolve in Damien. He realized that his true duty was not to a name or a fortune, but to the love that had awakened his soul, and to the woman who held his heart. He knew what he had to do. Once Damien's decision was made, a strange calm settled over him. The calm of a man who has looked into the abyss and chosen his path. He knew defying his family, defying society, would be a monumental undertaking, the scandal immense. But the thought of a life without Lissy was a far greater terror. His first challenge, finding her. His mother had been deliberately vague about Lissy's destination, and Annelise, when he dared to ask, had merely smiled a cruel, knowing smile. He needed help. He thought of Sarah, the kind housemaid who had been Lissy's friend. But then, a more formidable, and perhaps more effective ally came to mind. Mr. Hawthorne. The butler had seen everything, knew everything that transpired within Beaumont Hall, his loyalty to the family and to Damien himself, absolute, yet often expressed in inscrutable ways. That evening, Damien found Hawthorne in the butler's pantry, meticulously polishing silver. "Hawthorne," Damien began, his voice quiet but firm, "I need your assistance. It is a matter of utmost personal importance." The butler paused, his gaze meeting Damien's. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a calm, steady watchfulness. "I am always at your service, my lord." "I need to find Miss Moreau," Damien stated simply. "My mother arranged for her departure. I do not know her destination." Hawthorne set down his polishing cloth. "Indeed, my lord. The Dowager Viscountess was discreet. However, a flicker of something unreadable crossed the butler's face. Miss Moreau had once mentioned to Mrs. Pearson a distant cousin residing in the village of Oakhaven. A Mrs. Higgins, I believe. A seamstress. Damien's heart leaped. Oakhaven. It wasn't far. "Thank you, Hawthorne," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You have no idea what this means." "My duty is to the Beaumont family, my lord," Hawthorne replied, his expression unchanging. "And its happiness." Was that a hint of approval? Damien couldn't be sure, but he sensed an ally. Meanwhile, in Oakhaven, Lissy was trying to piece together a new life. Her cousin, a kind but struggling widow, had taken her in, but work was scarce, and the shadow of her dismissal from Beaumont Hall hung heavy over her. She spent her days assisting her cousin with mending, her nights sketching by candlelight, her heart aching with an emptiness that no amount of work or art could fill. She tried to be strong, to forget Damien, to accept her fate. But his face, his voice, the memory of their love, was an indelible imprint on her soul. She didn't know what scared her more, the bleakness of her future, or the terrifying, persistent hope that somehow, someday, things might change. Damien's desperate plan began to take shape with the unexpected, subtle assistance of Mr. Hawthorne, while Lissy, miles away, fought her own battles of despair and flickering hope, unknowingly on the cusp of a life-altering decision. Damien wasted no time. The next morning he ordered his fastest horse to be saddled. He did not inform his mother. He did not inform Annelise, who had, with an air of strained politeness, announced her intention to cut short her visit, sensing her campaign had irrevocably failed. As he was about to leave, Lady Eleanor confronted him in the main hall, her face pale with apprehension. "Damien, where are you going in such haste?" He faced her, his love for her warring with his new, unshakable resolve. "I am going to find Isabelle Moreau, mother," he said, his voice clear and strong, "and I am going to ask her to be my wife." Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Damien, have you taken leave of your senses? The scandal. Our family will survive," he stated gently but firmly, "but I will not survive without her. I love her, mother, and that is my final decision." Before she could protest further, before Annelise, who had emerged from the drawing room drawn by their raised voices, could utter a single scathing word, he turned and walked out of Beaumont Hall, leaving stunned silence in his wake. He rode like a man possessed, the wind tearing at him, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilarating hope. Oakhaven was a small, unassuming village. He found Mrs. Higgins' modest cottage easily enough. And there, in the small front garden, tending a meager patch of herbs, was Lissy. She looked up as he dismounted, her eyes widening in disbelief, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, her dress plain and worn. For a moment, she simply stared, as if he were an apparition, as if the world narrowed to just the two of them. "Damien," she whispered, her voice trembling. He strode towards her, his gaze never leaving hers. He stopped a few feet away, his heart overflowing. "Lissy," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have been a fool, a coward. I should never have let you go." He dropped to one knee on the damp earth, taking her work-roughened hand in his. "Isabelle Moreau, I love you more than life itself, more than my title, more than my lands, more than societal approval. I cannot live without you. Will you do me the profound honor of becoming my wife?" His voice broke on the last word. As if fate demanded it, the village seemed to hold its breath around them. Damien's grand gesture, his defiant departure from Beaumont, and his heartfelt public declaration in the humble setting of Oakhaven shattered all societal expectations, laying his heart and his future bare at Lissy's feet. Lissy stared at Damien, kneeling before her in the dirt of her cousin's garden, his fine clothes starkly out of place, his eyes filled with a love so profound it stole her breath away. Disbelief warred with a wild, surging joy. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a cruel, beautiful dream from which she would soon awaken. But the warmth of his hand engulfing hers, the earnestness in his beloved face, the desperate hope in his voice, it was all exquisitely real. "Damien," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "But your mother, Lady Annelise, the scandal, your position," the litany of obstacles, the very real challenges they would face, tumbled from her lips. She loved him. Oh, how she loved him. But could she condemn him to a life of societal censure? Could she bear being the cause of his potential ruin? The joy that had momentarily eclipsed her reason was now tempered with a sobering fear. Her world tilted, something inside her shifted. He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "None of that matters, Lissy. Not without you. I have made my choice. My only fear now is that you will not make the same one." His voice was raw with vulnerability. "My heart is yours, Isabelle. It always has been. All I ask is that you trust me. Trust us." She looked into his eyes and saw not the Viscount Sterling, but Damien. Her Damien, the man who had seen her, truly seen her when no one else had. The man who cherished her art, who listened to her dreams, who had ignited a passion in her she never knew she possessed. He was offering her everything, his love, his life, his name, and asking only for her heart in return. The societal challenges were immense, terrifying even. But the thought of a life without him, a life without this love that had become the very air she breathed, was a far greater terror. In that moment, a profound sense of her own worth, her own agency, surged through her. She was not just a companion, not just a servant girl. She was Isabelle Moreau, and she loved this man with every fiber of her being. Her soul answered. A slow smile, radiant and beautiful, spread across her face, banishing the last of her doubts. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with tears, yet strong and clear. "Oh, Damien, yes, yes, I will marry you." With a cry of pure joy, he surged to his feet, pulling her into his arms, swinging her around in a dizzying, ecstatic embrace. Their lips met in a kiss that was a promise, a vow, a celebration of a love that had defied all odds. The few villagers who had gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by the extraordinary sight of the local Viscount on his knees before the disgraced companion, broke into spontaneous, if somewhat bewildered, applause. Their journey would be difficult, Lissy knew that. But as she clung to Damien, his heart beating in unison with hers, she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that they would face it together. Lissy's brave and heartfelt decision to choose love, to embrace the future Damien offered despite the daunting societal challenges, sealed their commitment, their joyous reunion, a triumphant affirmation of a love that had truly conquered all. The days immediately following Damien's public declaration and Lissy's acceptance were a whirlwind. They returned to Beaumont Hall not as master and disgraced companion, but as a couple, betrothed, their love a defiant banner waved in the face of a scandalized county. Annelise, her pride in tatters and her plans for a viscountess title thoroughly demolished, made a swift and frosty departure, her parting words to Damien laced with a bitterness that promised lingering animosity in certain social circles. And then, there was Lady Eleanor. Her initial shock and profound disapproval were palpable. The first few days were strained, the air in Beaumont thick with unspoken reproaches, and a mother's deep-seated fear for her son's future and the family's standing. She could barely bring herself to look at Lissy. "She will ruin you, Damien," Eleanor had whispered to him one evening, her voice trembling. This infatuation will be the downfall of everything your father worked for." But Damien stood firm, his love for Lissy an unshakable shield. "She is not my ruin, mother," he replied gently but resolutely. "She is my salvation, and I will not live without her." Slowly, ever so slowly, something began to shift. Because Eleanor could not deny the profound, undeniable happiness radiating from her son, a light in his eyes she hadn't seen in years, perhaps ever. And Lissy, despite the awkwardness, despite the dowager's coldness, conducted herself with a quiet dignity, a gentle grace, and an unwavering affection for Damien that was impossible to wholly condemn. She made no demands, put on no airs. She was simply Lissy, genuine, kind, and deeply in love with Damien. One afternoon, Eleanor found Lissy in the conservatory, not sketching Damien this time, but patiently explaining the care of a delicate orchid to a young, nervous housemaid, her voice kind, her smile encouraging. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. What followed was not an immediate embrace, but a gradual thawing, a grudging acknowledgement. Perhaps, just perhaps, her son had not lost his mind after all. The societal backlash was, as expected, initially harsh. Whispers followed them. Invitations dwindled. But then, unexpectedly, support emerged from surprising corners. Old friends of Damien's father who admired courage. Tenants who had always found Lord Damien fair, but now saw him human. Even a few rebellious members of the gentry who found the whole affair rather romantic. The immediate aftermath was turbulent, a sea of societal disapproval and familial tension. But through it all, Damien and Lissy faced the future together, their united love a beacon, slowly beginning to win over even the most skeptical hearts, including most importantly the Dowager Viscountess Sterling. With the initial storm of scandal beginning to subside, and Lady Eleanor's grudging acceptance slowly warming into a cautious affection for Lissy, Damien and his new bride began to truly forge their own path. They chose to remain at Beaumont Hall, not as prisoners of its traditions but as its revitalized custodians. Damien, with Lissy's quiet encouragement, found a new energy for the estate. He delegated many of the more tedious administrative tasks that had once consumed him, focusing instead on innovative farming techniques, on fair treatment for his tenants, and on finding ways to make Beaumont not just a symbol of legacy, but a thriving, modern entity. He realized that true leadership wasn't about rigidly adhering to the past, but about wisely building for the future, and that happiness, his own and that of those around him, was a far more valuable currency than blind adherence to outdated social codes. Lissy, now Lady Sterling, a title she wore with a quiet humility that charmed many who had initially judged her, finally pursued her art openly. Damien, fiercely proud of her talent, converted a sun-drenched suite of rooms in the West Wing into a magnificent studio for her. Her sketches, once hidden away, now adorned the walls of their private apartments, and with his unwavering support and connections, she even began to accept small commissions, her delicate, insightful portraits and vibrant landscapes garnering quiet acclaim. She never sought fame, but the recognition of her talent was a quiet joy, a fulfillment of a dream she had once thought impossible. Because Damien believed in her, she finally, fully believed in herself. Their life was not always easy. There were still whispers, still moments of awkwardness in certain social circles, but they faced it all together, their love, their shield, and their strength. They filled Beaumont Hall not with grand formal entertainments, but with warmth, with laughter, with genuine friendship, and with the happy sounds of a home truly lived in and loved. They found joy in simple pleasures, long walks across the estate, evenings spent reading by the fire, quiet dinners filled with shared dreams and easy conversation. Their shared space became a testament to their love, a blend of old-world elegance and fresh, vibrant life. Damien and Lissy, now Lord and Lady Sterling, began to build a life defined by mutual support and shared passions, transforming Beaumont Hall into a home filled with love and purpose, where happiness and genuine connection were valued above all else. Several months into their marriage, as the vibrant colors of autumn painted the Beaumont estate in hues of gold and crimson, the love between Damien and Lissy had settled into a deep, comforting rhythm, yet it retained all of its initial passionate spark. The desperation and secrecy that had once characterized their stolen moments were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace, acceptance, and an ever-deepening intimacy. One crisp evening, after a quiet dinner shared in their private dining room, a cozy space they had redecorated together, filled with Lissy's art and Damien's favorite books, they found themselves in their bedroom. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm, inviting glow over the room. Lissy was curled up on the window seat, sketching the moonlit landscape, while Damien watched her, his heart overflowing with a love so profound it still sometimes took his breath away. He rose and went to her, gently taking the sketchbook and charcoal from her hands. "Enough art for one night, my love," he murmured, his voice a low caress. He drew her to her feet, his hands sliding around her waist. "But the moonlight is so perfect," she protested softly, though her eyes were already alight with a different kind of fire as she looked up at him. "Not as perfect as you," he whispered, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was at once tender and deeply passionate. This was the beauty of their love now, the freedom to express it openly, joyfully, without fear or reservation. Her touch was so gentle, so warm, yet it ignited him as fiercely as ever. Their lovemaking that night was not born of desperation or defiance, but of a deep, committed, and utterly contented love. It was a slow, languorous exploration of familiar, beloved territory, a reaffirmation of the sacred bond they shared. His hands moved over her with a reverence that made her sigh, her body arching into his, a willing offering. Her own caresses were filled with a tenderness, a deep understanding of this man who was her husband, her lover, her dearest friend. There were whispered endearments, soft laughter, sighs of pleasure that mingled with the crackling of the fire. The air thickened not with forbidden tension, but with the rich, heady aroma of cherished intimacy. Time stood still, their bedroom a sanctuary, their love a beacon. It was a passionate dance of souls who had found their home in each other, a celebration of the happiness and freedom they had fought so hard to achieve. Their love, now free from the shadows of secrecy and societal condemnation, blossomed into a deeply fulfilling and passionate intimacy, a heartwarming affirmation of their enduring bond and the quiet joy of their shared life. 2 years later, the grounds of Beaumont Hall were alive with the joyful sounds of a child's laughter. A small boy with Damien's dark hair and Lissy's bright, intelligent eyes chased butterflies across the sun-dappled lawn, his delighted squeals echoing in the warm summer air. Lissy, her face glowing with contentment, watched him from the shade of a large oak tree, her sketchbook resting in her lap, though today it remained unopened. Damien came to stand beside her, his arm slipping naturally around her waist, pulling her close. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. She leaned into him, her heart full. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she whispered, her gaze soft as she watched their son James stumble and fall, only to pick himself up with a determined grin, his spirit a perfect blend of hers and Damien's. Lady Eleanor, now a doting grandmother, sat on a nearby bench, her earlier disapproval a distant memory, replaced by a quiet, contented peace. She had come to genuinely love Lissy, to admire her strength, her kindness, and the unwavering happiness she brought to Damien, and, indeed, to all of Beaumont Hall. The scandal of their marriage had long since faded into a rather romantic local legend. Annelise had eventually married a wealthy older duke, her ambitions satisfied elsewhere, though a certain coolness always remained whenever her path crossed with the Sterlings. But for Damien and Lissy, their world was complete. Their love, once a forbidden desire whispered in secret, had transformed into a fulfilling, accepted, and deeply respected bond. Lissy's art had gained quiet renown, her unique perspective and emotional depth touching many. Damien had found a new purpose in managing his estate with a blend of tradition and innovation, but his greatest joy, his truest treasure, was his family. As he looked at Lissy, her face illuminated by love and the gentle afternoon sun, and at their son, the embodiment of their impossible, wonderful union, Damien Beaumont, Viscount Sterling, knew with absolute certainty that he had found his gentleman's true desire. It wasn't status, or wealth, or societal approval. It was this. It was her. It was love. And just like that, everything was perfect. In the golden afternoon light, surrounded by their love and their family, Damien and Lissy stood as a testament to a desire that, once forbidden, had blossomed into a life of profound happiness and fulfillment, proving that the greatest legacy is one written on the heart.